I thought getting banned from the New Year's party was my life's biggest humiliation. But I was wrong. It was just the warm-up. Because exactly 48 hours later, my brother's perfect fiancée walked into my boardroom to close the biggest deal of her career, and I was sitting at the head of the table. They called me the family embarrassment. I let them believe it right until they had nowhere left to run. My name is Lena Hartwell, and if there is one thing I have mastered in my 30 years of existence, it is the art of being underestimated. Most people fight against it, screaming for recognition and clawing for respect. But I learned early on that being invisible is a tactical advantage. When people do not see you, they do not see you coming. It was the night of December 29th when the vibration of my phone cut through the silence of my apartment like a drill. I was not expecting anyone. My circle is small by design, and my employees know better than to disturb me 2 days before the fiscal year closes, unless the servers are physically melting down. I picked up the device, the screen brightness stinging my eyes in the dim room. The message was from Ethan. "Do not show up on New Year's Eve. You will embarrass me." I stared at the words. They were not a question. They were not a request. They were an order delivered with the casual cruelty only an older brother can muster. Before I could even process the indignity of being uninvited to my own family's annual gathering, the group chat, ironically titled The Hartwell Legacy, began to light up with a coordinated assault that felt rehearsed. My mother was the first to chime in. "Please, Lena, this is for your brother's future. We need everyone to look successful and put together. His fiancée's family is very particular." Then came Marla, my older sister, who has never worked a day in her life that did not involve planning a gala or critiquing a caterer. "Just stay home, Lee. When you are stable, you can come to these things. It is just awkward for everyone when people ask what you are doing with your life and you have nothing to say." Finally, my father delivered the finishing blow. "Do not make a scene. Lena, we do not want to risk exposing your condition to the Wrens. Just sit this one out." My condition. I let out a short, dry laugh that echoed off the empty walls of my living room. They used that phrase constantly, wielding it like a medical diagnosis to explain away my existence, to the Hartwell family. My condition was a mix of alleged financial failure, social awkwardness, and a refusal to worship at the altar of their validation. They treated my career path, and by extension, my entire identity, like a shameful family secret, something to be covered up with polite smiles and vague excuses. They truly believed I was broke, struggling, and mentally fragile. I hovered my thumb over the keyboard. I could have fought back. I could have sent a screenshot of my bank balance. I could have sent a photo of the magazine cover I had been asked to pose for next month. I could have told them that the condition they were so afraid of was actually just intelligence they did not possess. But I did not. I typed 2 words. "I understand." I hit send and set the phone face down on the coffee table. It was not surrender. It was not agreement. It was the calculated silence of a predator who knows the trap has already been set. I had stopped begging for their love a decade ago. Now, I simply managed them like a low-priority risk in a complex algorithm. The scene in my mind shifted, snapping away from the petty domestic drama to the reality that actually mattered. The next morning, the sun was barely cresting over the city skyline when I stepped out of the private elevator and onto the 42nd floor of the Centennial Tower. The air here was different. It was cool, filtered, and smelled faintly of ozone and expensive espresso. This was my sanctuary. The glass doors slid open with a whisper, revealing the reception area where a brushed steel logo was mounted on a slate-gray wall. North Pine Systems. To my family, I was the girl who fiddled with computers in a dark room and probably fixed printers for spare cash. To the rest of the business world, I was the founder and CEO of the fastest-growing supply chain logistics and corporate risk compliance firm in the country. We did not just write code. We built the digital nervous systems for Fortune 500 companies. We predicted supply shortages before they happened. We automated compliance for multinational banks. And right now, we were 72 hours away from the biggest acquisition in our history. My executive assistant, Sarah, was already at her desk. She stood up the moment I walked in, handing me a tablet with the day's briefing before I even reached my office door. "Good morning, Ms. Hartwell," Sarah said, her voice matching the efficient clip of her heels as she walked beside me. "The board meeting is confirmed for 10 o'clock. The acquisition financing has cleared the final audit, and the legal team from the sell side has confirmed for January 2nd. I stopped walking. January 2nd, that was the date. "Is the room prepared?" I asked, pushing open the heavy glass door to my corner office. "Yes," Sarah replied. "We have reserved the main boardroom. Security protocols are in place. The NDAs are ready for the final signatures." "Excellent," I said, walking over to the floor-to-ceiling window that offered a panoramic view of the city below. Somewhere down there, in the suburbs, my family was likely waking up, congratulating themselves on successfully managing the problem child. They were probably discussing what lies they would tell the Wrens about my absence. Maybe they would say I was sick. Maybe they would say I was away on a retreat. They would never guess that while they were sipping mimosas and worrying about table settings, I was preparing to swallow a competitor worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The irony was delicious. The acquisition target was a company called Redbridge Logistics Tech. They were a legacy firm, bloated and inefficient, but they held key patents we needed. They were desperate to sell because they had missed their growth targets for 5 quarters in a row. It was a hostile environment, and their board had practically begged us to take them over before their stock price collapsed entirely. I sat down at my desk, a slab of black marble that cost more than my father's car, and opened the dossier for the January 2nd meeting. My eyes scanned the list of attendees from the opposing legal counsel. The sellers had hired Hollis and Ward, a prestigious law firm known for handling high-stakes mergers and acquisitions. It was the kind of firm my brother Ethan worshipped, the kind of place where pedigree mattered more than performance. I closed the file and leaned back in my chair, letting the silence of the office wash over me. It triggered a memory, sharp and uninvited, from when I was 16 years old. I was sitting at the kitchen table, soldering a circuit board for a robotics project. It was a delicate, intricate piece of work that I had spent weeks designing. My father had walked in, glanced at the mess of wires and tools, and sighed with a heaviness that crushed the air out of the room. "Lena," he had said, shaking his head, "why can you not be more like Marla? She is joining the debate team. She is meeting people. You are just tinkering. Who are you going to support with this junk? Are you going to be the IT girl who crawls under desks to plug in cables?" "It is engineering, Dad," I had tried to explain. "It is antisocial." He had corrected me. "You have no potential for the real world. You lack the polish. You are eccentric, and people do not do business with eccentrics. They do business with people like Ethan." That label stuck. Eccentric, loner, no potential. They looked at my introversion and saw weakness. They looked at my obsession with systems and logic and saw a lack of humanity. They decided, right then and there, that I was destined to be the family charity case when I started North Pine in a cramped studio apartment, eating instant noodles and working 20-hour days. They rolled their eyes. When I tried to tell them about our first major contract, they interrupted me to talk about Ethan's promotion or Marla's new country club membership. So I stopped talking. I built North Pine in the shadows of their neglect. I learned that if you do not tell people what you are doing, they cannot sabotage you. I learned that success screams, but wealth whispers. And power? Power does not need to say a single word. My family's rejection used to hurt. It used to feel like a physical weight in my chest, a constant reminder that I was defective goods. But sitting here now, surrounded by the empire I had built with my own 2 hands, I realized that the pain had calcified into something else. It had become fuel. I looked at the calendar on my screen. January 2nd. The text from Ethan was still on my phone. Embarrassment. I picked up a pen and tapped it rhythmically against the desk. They wanted to erase me from their picture-perfect life. They wanted to ensure I did not ruin their narrative of success and prestige. They had no idea that the very definition of success they were chasing was about to walk into my building, sit at my table, and beg for my signature. I have a rule in business. never let emotions dictate the deal. But as I looked at the city below, I decided to make an exception. This was not just business anymore. It was a correction of the record. My family could think whatever they wanted about me for the next 48 hours. They could tell their lies. They could hide their shameful secret. Because when the sun rose on January 2nd, the truth was not going to knock on the door politely. It was going to kick the door down, and I would be the one waiting on the other side. To understand why I did not fight the banishment from the New Year's party, you have to understand the ecosystem I grew up in. The Hartwell household was not a home. It was a stage, and we were all auditioning for roles in a play written by my parents. The genre was high society success, and the script did not allow for improvisation. My brother, Ethan Vale, was the undisputed star of this production. I say Ethan Vale because he began using his middle name as a surname professionally right out of college, deciding that it sounded more distinguished, more old money than Hartwell. My parents loved it. To them, it was branding. Ethan was the golden boy, the one who floated through life on a cloud of charisma and expensive cologne. He attended the right prep schools, sailed into an Ivy League university on a legacy admission, and landed a job at a boutique consulting firm where his primary skill seemed to be telling other people how to do their jobs while doing very little actual work himself. Ethan spoke the language of success fluently. He knew which wine to order, which golf clubs to join, and how to use corporate buzzwords like synergy and paradigm shift in casual conversation. He was a master of the aura. He could walk into a room and make people believe he was important simply because he acted like he was. My parents worshipped this quality. They did not care what he actually produced. They cared about how he was perceived. Then there was Marla, my older sister. If Ethan was the star, Marla was the publicist. She had built her entire existence around social positioning. She married a dermatologist, a man with a steady hand and a tedious personality, largely because the title doctor looked good on wedding invitations. Marla's life was a series of luncheons, charity galas, and committee meetings. She was the family's barometer for social acceptability. She knew exactly what the neighbors were thinking, what the trends were, and most importantly, she knew exactly what our parents wanted to hear. Her conversations were fluff, light, airy, and completely devoid of substance, but they were safe. And then there was me. I was the glitch in the system. I did not care about galas. I did not care about networking for the sake of networking. I cared about how things worked. While Marla was learning how to set a formal dining table and Ethan was practicing his handshake, I was in my room taking apart radios to see where the voices came from. I loved code because it was honest. If you wrote bad code, the program crashed. You could not charm a compiler. You could not lie to a server. It was a world of absolute truth, and I found comfort in that clarity. But in the Hartwell house, truth was less important than appearance. I remember the day I received my acceptance letter for a full scholarship to one of the top engineering programs in the country. It was a massive achievement, one that validated years of late nights and complex math. I came to the dinner table that night, the letter burning a hole in my pocket, feeling a rare spark of pride. I waited for a lull in Ethan's monologue about a business trip to Zurich before I dropped the news. "I got the scholarship," I said, placing the letter on the table. "Full tuition covered." My mother looked at the letter, then at me, her expression mild and unimpressed. "That is nice, dear. It will save us some money." That was it. No toast, no congratulations. My father did not even look up from his steak. He just cut a piece of meat, chewed slowly, and asked the question that would haunt me for the next decade. "So, Lena," he said, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin, "with this engineering degree, who exactly do you plan to work for? Are you going to be the IT support girl who crawls under desks to plug in cables for the executives?" The table went silent. Ethan snickered into his wineglass. Marla gave me a pitying look, the kind you give a stray dog that has wandered into a banquet. "I am studying systems architecture." "Dad," I said, my voice tight, "it is about building the infrastructure that runs companies." "Right," my father said, dismissing me with a wave of his fork. Support staff. Just make sure you dress appropriately. Tech people always look so disheveled. That moment defined me in their eyes. I was the help. I was the mechanic who kept the engine running so the important people like Ethan, could drive the car. The narrative cemented itself 2 years after I graduated college, when my first company, a data aggregation startup called Vector One, failed. It did not just fail. It crashed spectacularly due to a co-founder who embezzled our seed capital and fled the country. I was left with debt, a bruised ego, and a shattered credit score. I had to move back home for 3 months while I sorted out the legal mess. It was the longest 3 months of my life. My family did not offer sympathy. They offered confirmation. "I told you so," my father said, sitting in his armchair like a judge delivering a verdict. "You do not have the head for business. Lena, you are too focused on the technical side. You lack the killer instinct." "You should ask Ethan for advice," my mother suggested helpfully. "He knows how to manage people. Maybe he can get you an interview at his firm. As a receptionist, perhaps." They looked at my failure and saw proof that I was exactly who they thought I was. A dreamer, a tinkerer, someone destined to be mediocre. They viewed my bankruptcy not as a learning experience, but as my natural state. That was when I stopped talking. I realized that trying to explain my ambition to them was like trying to explain color to the blind. They could not see it, and they resented me for trying to describe it. So I made a choice. I would take the shame they handed me, and I would wear it like a cloak of invisibility. I moved out the second I scraped together the deposit for a studio apartment in the worst part of the city. I ate instant noodles and worked on a laptop I had rebuilt from spare parts. I analyzed every mistake I made with Vector One. I treated my failure not as a tragedy, but as a bug report. I patched the vulnerabilities. I rewrote the source code of my life. When I founded North Pine Systems, I did it in silence. I did not tell them about the sleepless nights. I did not tell them about the first small contract, or the second big one. I deliberately chose a sector, supply chain logistics and corporate risk compliance, that was so dry, so technical, and so boring that I knew my family would never ask follow-up questions. Whenever we gathered for holidays, and the conversation inevitably turned to careers, I played my part perfectly. "So, Lena," Ethan would ask, usually while checking his watch, "still doing the computer thing?" "Yes," I would say, keeping my face blank. "I am doing database optimization for inventory tracking." I could see the light die in their eyes. It was perfect. They would nod politely, boredom washing over them, and immediately pivot back to Marla's renovation plans or Ethan's new Porsche. They had no idea that while I was optimizing databases, I was also building an algorithm that predicted global shipping disruptions with 98% accuracy. They had no idea that I was hiring the best data scientists away from Silicon Valley giants. They had no idea that North Pine Systems was quietly becoming the backbone for 3 of the top 10 retailers in the world. As my bank account grew from 3 figures to 7, and then to 8, I learned the most valuable lesson of all. Privacy is power. My family lived for the applause. They needed the external validation to feel real. If no one was watching, did they even exist? I was the opposite. I realized that if I told them about my success, they would try to claim it. My father would want to advise me. Ethan would want a seat on the board. Marla would want me to sponsor her galas. They would take the one thing that was purely mine and contaminate it with their superficiality. So I let them believe I was struggling. I let them pay for my dinner when we went out, enduring their charitable smiles. I let them buy me sensible sweaters for Christmas because they thought I could not afford clothes. I let them define me as the poor but eccentric sister who just could not get her life together. It was a small price to pay for absolute freedom. But sitting in my office now, looking at the dossier for the upcoming acquisition, I realized that the silence had an expiration date. I had protected my world from them for 5 years, building a fortress they did not know existed. But Ethan had pushed too far. He had mistaken my silence for submission. He thought that because I did not brag, I had no teeth. He was about to learn that the quietest person in the room is often the one holding the remote control for the explosives. My family worshipped the aura of success, the shiny veneer of wealth. I was about to show them the difference between the gold paint they loved so much and the solid steel bar that could shatter it. The first time I met Claudia Wren was 5 weeks ago at our family Thanksgiving dinner, and the moment she walked through the door, I understood exactly why my brother had chosen her, or rather, I understood why he had acquired her. Claudia was not just a fiancée, she was a strategic asset. The final piece of the puzzle Ethan had been assembling since he learned to tie his own tie. She was stunning, of course, but in a way that felt engineered rather than natural. Her hair was a shade of blonde that suggested expensive maintenance. Her skin was flawless, and she wore a cashmere dress that cost more than the average American mortgage payment. But it was her energy that filled the room. She moved with the distinct, terrifying confidence of a woman who has never once walked into a building she did not feel she owned. She spoke in paragraphs that sounded like they had been drafted by a public relations team, vetted by legal, and then polished for maximum likability. My parents were in a state of near hysteria trying to accommodate her. My mother had spent 3 days stressing over the centerpiece, and my father had opened a bottle of wine he had been saving for a decade. They looked at Claudia and saw salvation. They saw a future where the Hartwell name was finally, irrevocably linked to true influence. I sat at the far end of the table, the designated quiet corner, watching the performance unfold. I was wearing a simple gray sweater and black trousers, blending into the background like a piece of unoffensive furniture. I sipped my water and waited, knowing that eventually, the spotlight would swing my way, not to illuminate me, but to use me as a prop to make Ethan look better. It happened between the main course and dessert. Claudia turned her gaze toward me, up close. Her eyes were sharp, analytical. She was an attorney, after all, not just any attorney, but a rising star in mergers and acquisitions at Hollis & Ward. I knew the firm well. They were sharks. They charged $1,000 an hour to destroy companies or save them, depending on who signed the check. "Ethan tells me you are quite the computer whiz," Claudia said, her voice dropping into that register of polite condescension people reserve for children or the elderly. "He says you are always working on little projects." The table went quiet. My father stopped chewing. My mother froze, her fork halfway to her mouth, terrified I would say something embarrassing. "I am in technology," I said, keeping my voice level and uninteresting. "I run a startup." It was the perfect answer. It was true. Yet it hid everything. To people like Claudia and Ethan, the word startup did not mean innovation or equity or initial public offerings. It meant unemployment with a better title. It meant desperation. It meant a basement office and a diet of energy drinks. I saw Ethan stiffen. He could not risk me sounding even remotely competent. If I had a real job, it undermined his narrative that he was the sole provider of success in the family. He needed me to be the tragedy so he could be the hero who graciously tolerated me. "She is still finding her footing," Ethan interrupted quickly, placing a possessive hand on Claudia's arm. "You know how the tech world is. It is very volatile. Lena has had some bad luck in the past, and she is still trying to figure out where she fits in." I looked at my brother. He was smiling, but his eyes were hard. He was practically begging me to play along, to be the failure he needed me to be. Claudia nodded slowly, her expression shifting into a mask of professional sympathy. It was a look I recognized instantly. It was the look a doctor gives a patient when the prognosis is terminal. "Oh, I completely understand," she said, tilting her head. "The market is incredibly unforgiving right now. At Hollis & Ward, I handle insolvency cases all the time. We see so many passionate young founders who just cannot make the numbers work. It is heartbreaking, really, but it is brave of you to keep trying." There it was, the poison wrapped in silk. Brave. That was the word people used for losers. Winners were called brilliant, visionary, or ruthless. Losers were called brave. She continued, warming to her theme. "You know, if you ever need advice on when to cut your losses, I could probably introduce you to some junior associates. Sometimes the smartest business decision is knowing when to walk away and find a stable corporate job. There is no shame in a regular paycheck. Lena. My mother let out a breath she had been holding. She looked relieved. Claudia had framed my failure so elegantly, so kindly. It was not an insult. It was charity. I looked down at my plate, fighting the urge to laugh. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. Here sat Claudia Wren, a junior partner at a law firm that billed by the hour, lecturing me on stability. She had no idea that just 2 days prior, I had authorized a wire transfer of $40 million to a secure escrow account as a deposit for the Redbridge deal. She had no idea that my little project had a market capitalization that exceeded the combined value of every asset her parents owned. She had no idea that the stable corporate job she was suggesting I find would likely pay me in a year what I earned in interest every week. But the most delicious part was the connection she had unknowingly made. Hollis and Ward. She worked for the firm representing the company I was about to buy. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized she was not malicious. She was just blind. She lived in a world where status was worn on the sleeve, where success was measured by the brand of your watch and the zip code of your office. She could not conceive of power that did not advertise itself, because I was quiet, because I did not brag, because my clothes were simple. I did not register on her radar as a threat. I was static noise. I could have destroyed her right then. I could have pulled out my phone and shown her the term sheet. I could have asked her if she was aware that her firm's biggest client, Redbridge Logistics, was currently begging my team to preserve their executive bonuses in the buyout. I could have told her that I was the reason her senior partners were working overtime this holiday season. I imagined the look on Ethan's face. I imagined the silence that would descend on the room, heavy and suffocating. It would be satisfying. It would be explosive. But it would be cheap. Arguments are for people who need to prove they are right. I did not need to prove anything. The ink on the contracts would do that for me. Reality is the only argument that matters. And reality was coming for them like a freight train. So I did the thing that cemented their view of me. I surrendered. "You are right," I said softly, looking up at Claudia with wide, innocent eyes. "It is very hard. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just wasting my time, but I suppose I just have to keep plugging away at it." Claudia smiled, a genuine, benevolent smile. She felt good about herself. She had imparted wisdom to the poor relation. She had established her dominance without raising her voice. "Well, we are all rooting for you," she said, reaching across the table to pat my hand. "Just do not let pride get in the way of survival, okay?" I let her hand rest on mine for a second before pulling away. "Thank you, Claudia," I said. "I will keep that in mind." Ethan beamed. The crisis was averted. The hierarchy was preserved. He was the king. She was the queen. And I was the jester who knew my place. The dinner continued. They talked about their upcoming wedding in the Hamptons. They talked about the guest list, which included senators and CEOs. They talked about the future as if it were a straight line they had already drawn. I ate my pumpkin pie and thought about January 2nd. I thought about the boardroom at North Pine Systems. I pictured the moment the elevator doors would open. I pictured Claudia walking in, clutching her leather briefcase, ready to bully a small-time startup into submission. I pictured the moment she would look at the head of the table and see the girl she had pitied over turkey and stuffing. The revenge I wanted was not a scream. It was not a dramatic reveal over a dinner table. I wanted the slow, crushing realization that happens in a quiet room. I wanted her to look at the paperwork, then look at me, and realize that while she was playing social games, I had bought the board. I excused myself early, claiming a headache. My parents were happy to see me go. My presence was a dampener on their celebration. As I walked to the door, Ethan stopped me in the hallway. He looked towering and smug, flushed with wine and victory. "You did good tonight, Lee," he said, using a nickname I hated. "Thanks for not making up stories about your business. Claudia is sharp. She would have seen right through you." I put on my coat and wrapped my scarf around my neck. I know she is sharp. Ethan, I said, that is why I like her. He laughed, clapping me on the shoulder. Yeah, she is out of your league, kid. But hey, maybe some of it will rub off on you. I opened the door to the cold November air. Maybe, I said. I walked to my car, a sensible 4-year-old sedan that I kept specifically for family visits, and drove away. As soon as I turned the corner, out of sight of their house, I pulled over and took out my secure phone. I dialed my chief financial officer. It is Lena, I said when he answered. Ms. Hartwell? It is Thanksgiving. Is everything all right? Everything is fine, I said, looking back at the glow of my parents' house in the rear-view mirror. I just want to increase the indemnity clause for the Hollis and Ward legal team in the final draft. Make sure every single lawyer working on the sell side is personally liable for due diligence errors. There was a pause on the line. That is aggressive. Lena, standard practice is to cap liability. I am not feeling standard tonight, I replied, my voice cold. I want them to sweat over every single comma. I want them to be terrified of making a mistake. Understood, he said. I will have legal draft it first thing Monday. I hung up and drove home. Ethan thought I was embarrassed. Claudia thought I was pathetic. My parents thought I was broken. Let them have their Thanksgiving. Let them have their turkey and their wine and their delusions of grandeur. I did not need their approval. I owned their reality. And in a few weeks, when the holidays were over and the real world started up again, I was going to hand them the bill. The 30th of December was a ghost town in the financial district. The streets below my office were gray and empty, stripped of the usual swarm of commuters who had fled the city for ski trips in Aspen or beaches in Tulum. But inside the 42nd floor of North Pine Systems, the air was electric. While the rest of the world was winding down, my team was sprinting. Mergers and acquisitions do not care about holidays. In fact, the end of the fiscal year is often the bloodiest time in the corporate calendar. Companies desperate to offload liabilities before the fourth quarter earnings call make mistakes. They get sloppy. And Redbridge Logistics Tech was desperate. I stood at the head of the conference table, watching my general counsel, Grant Keller, organize stacks of dossiers. Grant was a man who spoke in clauses and caveats. He had been with me since North Pine was just a server rack in a rented garage, and he knew where every body was buried because he had usually drafted the non-disclosure agreements for the funerals. The final diligence report is in, Grant said, sliding a thick binder across the polished mahogany. Redbridge is bleeding. Their liquidity is worse than we projected. They are not just selling because they missed growth targets. They are selling because if they do not close this deal by the second week of January, they will not make payroll. I opened the binder. The numbers were catastrophic for them, which meant they were beautiful for me. We were acquiring their patents and their client list for 60 cents on the dollar. It was a slaughter, legalized by signatures and stamps. Who is on the sell-side team? I asked, flipping past the financial spreadsheets to the legal section. Grant adjusted his glasses. They retained Hollis and Ward, standard choice for a legacy firm trying to look strong while they capsize. I ran my finger down the list of attorneys representing Redbridge. There were 2 senior partners listed at the top, men whose names cost $800 an hour just to read. Below them were the senior associates. And there it was. Claudia Wren, associate, intellectual property and contract risk assessment. My finger stopped on the paper. I felt a cold, sharp jolt of satisfaction, like the click of a lock tumbling into place. Of course she was on the team. It made perfect sense. She was the rising star, the hardworking heiress who specialized in cleaning up messy corporate failures. And Redbridge was a very messy failure. I stared at her name for a long moment. I could almost hear her voice from Thanksgiving, dripping with faux sympathy, telling me that startups are hard and offering to introduce me to junior staff for career advice. She was coming here to dissect my company's offer, to look for weaknesses in our contract, to bully the buyer into better terms. She had no idea that the buyer was the girl she had practically patted on the head between courses. Grant noticed my hesitation. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Lena? Is there an issue with the opposing counsel? I looked up. Grant knew about my family situation in broad strokes. He knew I did not speak to them often, but he did not know the details. However, he was sharp enough to recognize the surname. Wren, Grant said, testing the word. That is the same family your brother is marrying into, is it not? Yes, I said, my voice flat. Claudia Wren is his fiancée. Grant's professional demeanor instantly shifted into crisis management mode. He pulled a pen from his pocket. That is a potential conflict of interest. Lena, if she is negotiating against her future sister-in-law, and she does not know it, this could get messy. We have grounds to request her recusal. We can call the senior partner at Hollis & Ward right now and demand they swap her out for another associate to ensure impartiality. It is the safe play. I looked back at the binder. I traced the letters of her name again. Requesting her removal would be the professional thing to do. It would be the kind thing to do. It would save her the shock, the embarrassment, and the inevitable panic when she walked into this room. It would protect my brother from the fallout. No, I said. Grant paused, his pen hovering over his notepad. No? Do not request a recusal, I commanded, closing the binder with a decisive snap. But Lena, Grant argued gently, if she finds out halfway through the meeting, she could claim she was blindsided. She could claim bad faith. She will not find out halfway through. I said, walking over to the window. She will find out the moment she walks through the doors. And as for conflict of interest, there is none. I have no financial ties to her or my brother. We are legally strangers. The fact that she is marrying my brother is a personal matter, not a professional one. If she did her due diligence, she would know who the CEO of North Pine is. If she assumed I was nobody because of a dinner conversation, that is a failure of her research, not a failure of my disclosure. Grant watched me for a moment, studying my face. He saw the steel behind the decision. He realized this was not about the deal anymore. You are setting a trap, he stated. It was not a question. I am allowing the truth to arrive on its own schedule. I corrected him. If the past decides to walk into my boardroom, I am not going to lock the door. Keep her on the list. Grant, I want her here on January 2nd. He nodded slowly, putting his pen away. Understood. I will confirm the attendee list with Hollis & Ward this afternoon. The next 24 hours were a blur of final preparations. We locked down the term sheets. We finalized the earn-out structures. I worked with a cold precision, driving my team to perfection. I wanted the acquisition of Redbridge to be flawless. I wanted the paperwork to be bulletproof. When Claudia Wren sat down to read my contract, I wanted her to find absolutely nothing she could tear apart. I wanted her to be forced to admire the architecture of her own defeat. Then came New Year's Eve. The city outside my penthouse apartment began to ignite with noise. Fireworks popped in the distance, and the hum of parties drifted up from the streets. Inside, my apartment was silent. I did not have decorations up. I did not have guests. I had a bottle of vintage Pinot Noir, a single glass, and my phone. I sat on my beige sofa, legs tucked under me, and opened the family group chat. It was a masochistic ritual, perhaps, but I needed to see it. I needed to see what I was missing so I could fully appreciate what I was about to gain. Photos were flooding in. My parents were at a black tie gala at the country club. My mother wore pearls and a smile that looked painful. My father was holding a cigar, looking self-important. Marla was posing with her husband, showing off a diamond bracelet. And then there was Ethan and Claudia. They looked like royalty. Ethan was in a bespoke tuxedo, his hair perfectly coiffed, his arm draped possessively around Claudia's waist. Claudia was wearing a silver gown that shimmered like liquid mercury. They were laughing in the photo, heads thrown back, the picture of a couple who owned the world. Under the photo, my mother had commented, "The perfect couple. So proud of our Ethan." Marla added, "Stunning. Everyone is asking about the wedding." I took a sip of wine. The liquid was dark and rich, coating my tongue. I zoomed in on Claudia's face. She looked happy. She looked secure. She looked like a woman who knew exactly where her life was going. My phone buzzed in my hand. A private message notification appeared at the top of the screen. It was from Ethan. "Do not show up tonight. I am serious." I did not reply immediately. A minute later, another message came through. "Thanks for understanding. Lena, really, it is just better this way. Claudia cannot know about you. It would be too hard to explain your situation to her family tonight." My situation. He was still doing it. He was still selling the lie that I was a liability, a broken thing that needed to be hidden in the attic. He genuinely believed he was doing me a favor by excluding me, saving me from the embarrassment of being compared to his shining success. He wrote, "Claudia cannot know about you." He meant she could not know about the sister who failed. He had no idea that in 48 hours, she would know everything about the woman who signed her clients' checks. I typed my reply slowly, savoring every letter. "Have fun." I hit send. Then I turned off my phone. I placed it face down on the coffee table next to the wine glass. I walked to the window and looked out at the skyline. The countdown was beginning in Times Square. Millions of people were screaming, cheering, welcoming the new year with hope and noise. I stood in the silence of my apartment and smiled. My family thought they had successfully erased me from their night. They thought they had won. They were clinking glasses and making toasts, secure in their bubble of manufactured perfection. Let them have their party. Let them have their champagne and their caviar. Let Ethan preen and let Claudia sparkle. Because the calendar was turning. The 31st was ending, and January 2nd was coming. I raised my glass to the empty room, to the reflection of the woman in the window who looked nothing like the failure they described. "Happy New Year, Ethan," I whispered. I took a final sip of wine and went to bed. I needed to be rested. The truth was taking the elevator up on Tuesday morning, and I wanted to be wide awake when the doors opened. The morning of January 2nd broke over the city with a sky the color of bruised steel. It was a Tuesday, the kind of day that demands efficiency, stripping away the holiday haze and forcing the world back into the grid of commerce and consequence. I arrived at the North Pine Systems headquarters at 6 o'clock in the morning. The 42nd floor was silent, save for the low hum of the climate control systems. I walked through the corridors, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished concrete floors. I liked the office when it was empty. It felt like a sleeping giant, a massive reservoir of potential energy waiting for my command to release it. I made my way to the primary boardroom, a space I had designed with a specific psychological intent. It was not a room meant for collaboration. It was a room meant for capitulation. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a vertigo-inducing view of the metropolis below, reminding everyone inside just how high up they were and how far they could fall. The table was a single slab of black granite, 15 feet long, cold to the touch and impossible to scratch. At the head of the table sat my chair, high-backed, ergonomic leather, looking less like office furniture and more like a throne. I sat down and opened the presentation deck on my tablet. This was the weapon. I swiped through the slides, absorbing the data I already knew by heart. The valuation of Redbridge Logistics Tech was set at $240 million. The earn-out clauses were strict. Tied to performance metrics I knew they would struggle to hit without my algorithms. The integration roadmap was aggressive. I was not just buying their client list. I was stripping their code for parts and discarding the rest. Sarah, my executive assistant, entered the room at 7:30. She carried a steaming cup of black coffee and placed it precisely on a coaster to my right. "Good morning, Ms. Hartwell," she said, her voice hushed. "Security has confirmed the Hollis and Ward team is en route. They are expected to arrive at the lobby by 9:45. Should I have catering set up a breakfast spread?" "No," I said, not looking up from the screen. "Water only, sparkling and still. Nothing else." Sarah paused. Usually, for a deal of this magnitude, we offered pastries, fruit, high-end espresso. We courted the other side. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I am sure," I replied, finally looking at her. "We are not hosting a social event. Sarah, We are conducting a transaction, and tell security to hold them in the lobby until exactly 9:55. I want them brought up strictly on time. No early access. No time to settle in and get comfortable." Sarah nodded, sensing the rigidity in my tone. "Understood." She left, and I was alone again with the numbers. At 9 o'clock, the door opened again. This time it was Maya Rourke, my chief technology officer and one of the few people on Earth I trusted completely. Maya was brilliant, chaotic, and wore hoodies to board meetings, though today she had compromised with a sharp black blazer over her t-shirt. She stopped in the doorway, looking at me sitting at the head of the table. "You are running the lead?" Maya asked, arching an eyebrow. "Usually. You let Grant handle the legal introductions while you listen from the side. You like to be the observer, remember? The gray man strategy." I turned off my tablet screen. The reflection of the room stared back at me in the black glass. "The strategy has changed," I said calmly. Maya walked in and pulled out the chair to my right. She spun it around and sat down, studying my face. She knew something was off. She knew I was too poised, too sharp. "Is this about the Redbridge tech stack?" Maya asked. "Because I told you. Their legacy code is a mess. But the patents are solid. We do not need to intimidate them. They are already desperate to sell." "It is not about the code." "Maya," I said. "Then what is it?" I looked at the empty chairs on the other side of the table. I imagined the people who would fill them in less than an hour. "I want them to see the person who really makes the decisions." I said, "I want there to be absolutely no confusion about who owns this building and who is just visiting." Maya held my gaze for a second, then shrugged. "All right, boss. It is your show. Just do not make the lawyers cry before I get a chance to ask about their encryption protocols." I checked my watch. 9:30? I adjusted the cuffs of my white silk blouse. I smoothed the lapels of my navy suit jacket. I had chosen this outfit carefully. It was severe, expensive, and utterly devoid of softness. It was armor. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. 9:40, 9:45, 9:50. At 9:52, my phone buzzed with a message from security. "Guests are in the elevator. ETA 3 minutes." I stood up and walked to the window one last time. I looked down at the streets where tiny cars crawled like ants. Somewhere down there, Ethan was probably waking up, hungover from his perfect New Year's Eve, rolling over to kiss his perfect fiancée goodbye as she left for her big meeting. He probably wished her luck. He probably told her to go crush that little tech company. He had no idea he was sending her into a wood chipper. I walked back to the head of the table and sat down. I placed my hands on the cool granite, fingers laced together. Maya sat to my right. Grant Keller, my general counsel, sat to my left. Behind us, 2 junior analysts sat with open laptops, ready to record every word. The room was silent. We were a phalanx, waiting. At 9:58, the heavy double doors at the far end of the room swung open. A security officer stepped in, holding the door, and ushered them inside. "Here is the delegation from Hollis and Ward and the Redbridge executive team," the guard announced. They flowed into the room like a dark river of expensive wool and leather. There were 6 of them in total. 2 older men in pinstripes led the pack, the senior partners. Behind them came the Redbridge CEO, looking tired and pale. And in the middle of the formation walked Claudia. She looked exactly as she had at Thanksgiving, perhaps even more polished. She wore a cream-colored suit that screamed capability. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, professional bun. She was walking with her head down, eyes glued to a tablet in her hand, reviewing her notes. She was confident. She was the expert. She was the big city lawyer coming to dictate terms to a startup that had gotten lucky. She did not look up as she entered. She simply followed the heels of the senior partner in front of her, moving to the side of the table designated for the sellers. The senior partner, a man named Mr. Sterling, took the initiative. He projected his voice with the booming conviviality of a man who assumes he is the most important person in the room. "Good morning, everyone," Sterling said. placing his briefcase on the table. "We represent Redbridge Logistics. I am Arthur Sterling, senior partner at Hollis & Ward. This is my colleague, Mr. Vance, and our associate who specializes in intellectual property and risk, Ms. Wren." At the sound of her name, Claudia nodded professionally, still arranging her papers, barely glancing at the opposition. She treated us as a collective noun, the buyers, rather than individuals. To her, we were just faces to be maneuvered. The Redbridge CEO took his seat, looking nervous. The lawyers began to settle in, clicking pens, opening files. The air in the room seemed to thicken. My team did not move. We did not smile. We did not offer handshakes. Mr. Sterling looked up, expecting the usual pleasantries. He paused when he saw the stillness on our side of the table. He looked at Grant, then at Maya, and finally, his eyes landed on me. He blinked. He saw a young woman at the head of the table, stone-faced, radiating a cold authority that disrupted his rehearsed opening. I waited until the last briefcase clicked shut. I waited until the rustling of papers stopped. I waited until the silence was so heavy it felt physical. Then I stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate. It drew every eye in the room. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," I said. My voice was low, steady, and amplified by the acoustics of the glass walls. Claudia was busy pulling a stylus from her tablet case. She was distracted, focused on her task, assuming the voice belonged to some HR director or mid-level manager. "Welcome to North Pine Systems," I continued, my eyes locking onto the top of her blonde head. I trust the elevator ride was smooth. Something in my tone, a specific cadence, a familiarity buried under the layer of corporate ice, pierced through her concentration. I saw her hand freeze. The stylus hovered an inch above the screen. It was a micro-reaction, invisible to everyone else, but screamingly loud to me. Her brain was processing the audio input, cross-referencing it with a memory she had filed away under irrelevant family drama. She slowly lifted her chin. Her eyes moved past the granite table. They moved past the water glass. They moved up to my suit jacket, my face, and finally, they locked onto my eyes. The color drained from her face so fast it looked like a physical blow. Her mouth parted slightly, a silent gasp dying in her throat. The confident, high-powered attorney vanished, replaced by a woman staring at a ghost. She knew. In that fraction of a second, the Thanksgiving dinner played back in her mind. The pity, the advice about finding a stable job, the conversation about startups being risky, the arrogance of her fiancé, the exclusion from the New Year's party. It all crashed into the reality of the boardroom. I did not smile. I did not smirk. I simply held her gaze, letting the weight of her own assumptions crush the air out of her lungs. "I am Lena Hartwell," I said, introducing myself to the room but speaking only to her, founder and CEO, and we have a lot to discuss today. The silence that followed my introduction was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and pressurized. It felt as though the air had been sucked out of the room by a vacuum, leaving only the hum of the servers and the sound of Claudia Wren's worldview shattering into a million jagged pieces. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, fixed on me with a terrifying intensity. It was the look of a machine encountering a fatal error, a processor unable to reconcile two conflicting sets of data. In one set, I was Lena the charity case, the embarrassment, the girl who needed career advice and hand-me-down sympathy. In the other set, the one currently staring her in the face, I was the predator who had just bought her client for breakfast. She made a sound. It was a small, strangled noise, barely a word. "Lena?" she whispered. The name came out fractured, stripped of the condescension she had used at Thanksgiving. It was a question, a plea for this to be a hallucination. You are... She stopped. She could not finish the sentence. She could not say you are the CEO because admitting that would mean admitting that she, the high-powered attorney, had been spectacularly, humiliatingly wrong. Mr. Sterling, the senior partner, sensed the disruption. He looked from Claudia to me, his brow furrowing in confusion. In his world, associates did not gawk at the opposition. "Ms. Wren?" Sterling asked, his voice sharp with warning. "Do you know Ms. Hartwell?" Claudia flinched. She looked at her boss, then back at me. Her mouth opened and closed. She was drowning in the middle of a boardroom, and I was the only one with a life preserver. I decided not to throw it to her. Instead, I offered a smile. It was a polite, razor-thin expression that conveyed zero warmth. "We have met," I said smoothly, addressing Sterling but keeping my eyes locked on Claudia. "Ms. Wren is engaged to my brother. We have interacted in a family context." Sterling's face relaxed into a look of relief. "Oh, I see. A personal connection. Well, that is a pleasant surprise. Small world." I leaned forward, placing my elbows on the black granite table. "It is a very small world, Mr. Sterling." I agreed. "However, I want to be clear. Today is not a family reunion. Today is a business transaction. And I expect the personal connection to have absolutely no bearing on the professional standards of this meeting." The warning was clear. Do not expect mercy. I turned my gaze back to Claudia. "Is that understood, Ms. Wren?" I asked. Claudia nodded. It was a jerky, mechanical motion. Yes," she stammered. "Yes, of course." She went to set her tablet down on the table, but her hand spasmed. The expensive device slipped from her grip, clattering loudly against the stone surface. The sound rang out like a gunshot in the quiet room. She scrambled to grab it, her fingernails scraping against the granite, her composure disintegrating in real time. I watched her hands. They were trembling, not a subtle shake, but a violent, uncontrollable tremor. This was the woman who had patted my hand at the dinner table and told me that failure is part of the process. Now, she was realizing that the only failure in the room was her own due diligence. I turned away from her, dismissing her panic as irrelevant, and directed my attention to the Redbridge CEO. "Let us begin," I said, my voice dropping into the cool, authoritative register I used for closings. I tapped my screen, and the main display on the wall behind me lit up. It showed a waterfall chart of Redbridge's declining revenue against North Pine's projected integration efficiency. As you know, I started, ignoring the rustling sound of Claudia trying to reorganize her scattered papers. North Pine Systems has agreed to a valuation of $240 million for the acquisition of all Redbridge assets, including the intellectual property portfolio and the client roster. I saw Claudia's head snap up again at the number, $240 million. I continued, pacing my words perfectly. "We have already placed a $40 million deposit in escrow as of Friday. The remaining balance will be structured as a mix of cash and stock, contingent on the retention of key engineering talent during the transition period." I paused, letting the numbers hang in the air. $40 million cash. I could see the math happening behind Claudia's eyes. She was remembering the sweater I wore at Thanksgiving. She was remembering my beat-up sedan. She was remembering Ethan telling her I was struggling, and now she was sitting 10 feet away from someone who could write a $40 million check without blinking. The cognitive dissonance was making her physically ill. She looked pale, her skin taking on the sheen of cold sweat. I moved to the next slide. "However," I said, hardening my tone, "our audit of your codebase revealed significant redundancies. We are not paying for bloat. We are paying for efficiency. Therefore, the earn-out structure for the Redbridge executive team will be strictly tied to the successful migration of your data to our servers within 6 months. If you miss the deadline, the earn-out drops to 0. The Redbridge CEO looked uncomfortable. "That is a very aggressive timeline. Ms. Hartwell." I looked him dead in the eye. "It is a necessary timeline," I countered. "We operate at the speed of the market, not the speed of your legacy systems. If you cannot keep up, we do not want you." I was in complete control. I was fluent in the language of power. I was dissecting their business with surgical precision, showing them exactly where their organs were failing and exactly how I intended to harvest them. Claudia sat frozen. She was not taking notes. She was staring at me with a mixture of horror and awe, She was realizing that the pathetic little sister was a fiction. The woman in front of her was a titan. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. He seemed impressed by my hard line. We understand the terms, Sterling said. Now, regarding the intellectual property, we have prepared a risk assessment on the transfer of the patents. Ms. Wren has the details. The room turned to Claudia. This was her moment. This was why she was here. She was the expert. She was the high-billing associate from Hollis and Ward. Claudia? Sterling prompted, looking at her expectantly. Claudia jolted as if she had been electrocuted. She looked at Sterling, then at the Redbridge CEO, and finally at me. I leaned back in my chair. Crossing my arms, I waited. She started, her voice cracking. She cleared her throat. We have reviewed the patents. She looked down at her tablet. Her fingers swiped across the screen, but she was just moving pixels around. She was not reading. Her brain had flatlined. Go on, Sterling said, a hint of irritation creeping into his voice. The encumbrances on the logistics algorithm? Right, Claudia said. The algorithm. She swallowed hard. Her chest was heaving slightly. We believe that She stopped. She looked at me. I was watching her with the impassive curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen under a microscope. I am sorry, Claudia whispered. I am having trouble locating the file. Sterling stared at her. This was amateur hour. This was a disaster. Ms. Wren, Sterling snapped, you prepared the deck yourself this morning. I know, Claudia said, her voice rising in pitch. I know. My system is... She was falling apart. The confident, articulate lawyer was gone. In her place was a terrified girl who had realized she had insulted a shark and then jumped into the tank with it. Allow me to assist. I cut in, my voice calm and deadly. I tapped my tablet. The slide behind me changed to display a complex diagram of patent filings. If Ms. Wren is unprepared, I said, looking at Sterling, I can summarize her findings for her. Your team is concerned about the third-party dependencies in the routing code. You are worried that transferring the license to North Pine will trigger a renegotiation clause with your vendors. You are going to argue that we should assume that liability. I paused, looking at Claudia. Is that accurate, Ms. Wren, or did I miss something in the file you cannot seem to find? Claudia looked like she wanted to vanish into the floor. She had been completely preempted. I had done her job for her, better than she could, while simultaneously highlighting her incompetence. Yes, she whispered, defeat washing over her. That is accurate. Sterling looked furious. He glared at Claudia, his face tightening. I apologize. Ms. Hartwell, it seems my associate is not feeling well. It is fine, I said, dismissing her with a wave of my hand. We can proceed without her input if necessary. The meeting continued for another 10 minutes, but Claudia was a ghost. She sat hunched over, her eyes darting around the room, unable to focus. Every time I spoke, every time I commanded the room or corrected a figure, I saw her flinch. She was replaying every interaction we had ever had, viewing it through the lens of this new reality. She was realizing that while she was playing social games, I had been building an empire. Finally, she stood up. The movement was abrupt, jarring. Excuse me, she blurted out. Everyone stopped. Sterling looked ready to fire her on the spot. I have to take this call. She lied. Her phone was dark. It was not ringing. It is an emergency. She did not wait for permission. She grabbed her purse, leaving her tablet and her briefcase on the table, and bolted for the door. She walked fast, stumbling slightly in her heels, desperate to escape the glass walls and the cold eyes and the suffocating pressure of her own mistake. The door swung shut behind her, leaving a heavy, awkward silence in its wake. Sterling sighed, rubbing his temples. I am terribly sorry. Ms. Hartwell, that was highly unprofessional. I assure you, Hollis and Ward usually maintains a much higher standard. I looked at the empty chair where Claudia had been sitting. I looked at the tablet she had left behind, the screen still glowing with the presentation she had failed to deliver. It left a hole in the room, a concrete heavy void where her arrogance used to be. "Do not worry about it, Mr. Sterling," I said, turning back to the group. I picked up my pen. "Let us continue," I said. I believe we were discussing the price of failure. The meeting paused for a 15-minute recess after Claudia's abrupt exit. The air in the boardroom was still vibrating with the tension of her departure, but business does not stop for breakdowns. My team used the interval to refill water glasses and check their secure messages. I remained in my seat, staring at the black granite table, my mind replaying the look of absolute terror on Claudia's face. It was satisfying, yes, but something about the geometry of the situation did not align. Grant Keller, my general counsel, leaned in close to my chair. He did not look triumphant. He looked disturbed. He was holding a slender file folder that he had pulled from a secondary stack of due diligence documents, the pile reserved for background checks and conflict of interest screenings. "Lena," Grant said, his voice dropping to a murmur that barely registered above the hum of the air conditioning, "we need to talk about something, now." I turned to him, sensing the shift in his demeanor. "What is it? Did the financing hit a snag?" "No," Grant said. He opened the folder and slid a single sheet of paper toward me. It was a printout of an archived email chain, dated 4 months ago. It is about the anomaly I mentioned earlier. I thought it was just a standard name drop, the kind of thing people do to get in the door. But now that I know who Claudia is, and who your brother is, this looks different. This looks like fraud. I looked down at the paper. The email was sent from a private Gmail account. The sender was Ethan Vale. The recipient was Arthur Sterling, the senior partner at Hollis & Ward, who was currently drinking coffee in the hallway. I felt a cold prickle at the base of my neck. I began to read. "Dear Mr. Sterling, regarding your firm's upcoming strategic assessment of the logistics tech sector, I wanted to reach out quietly. As you may know, my family has significant equity and advisory influence within North Pine Systems, while my sister, Lena, is the public face of the operation. I handle the strategic macro vision and act as the primary liaison for high-level partnerships. She can be somewhat volatile and difficult to pin down without my guidance. If Hollis & Ward or your clients need a back channel to North Pine for potential acquisition talks or licensing, I am happy to facilitate that conversation to ensure it goes smoothly. Best regards, Ethan Vale." I read it twice, then a third time. My hand curled into a fist on the table. The audacity was breathtaking. For years, Ethan had told everyone who would listen that I was a failure. He had painted me as the eccentric, struggling sister who needed charity and career advice. He had sat at Thanksgiving dinner and nodded along while Claudia pitied me. But secretly, behind the scenes, he was selling me. He was using my company, the very company he mocked, as currency to buy his way into Claudia's world. He had lied to a senior partner at a major law firm, claiming to have advisory influence and equity in a business he had never set foot inside. He had reduced me to a volatile figurehead who needed his steady hand to manage, positioning himself as the gatekeeper to my success. The puzzle pieces of the New Year's Eve banishment slammed together with a deafening clarity. I had thought he uninvited me because he was ashamed of my poverty. I thought he wanted to hide his embarrassing sister from the elites. I was wrong. He did not ban me because he was ashamed of me. He banned me because he was terrified of me. If I had walked into that party, if I had shaken hands with Arthur Sterling or Claudia's father, and they had asked me, "So, how is Ethan's advisory role going?" the entire house of cards would have collapsed instantly. He needed me invisible not to save his reputation, but to save his lie. He needed me to be the struggling artist, so that no one would think to ask me about the board seats he claimed to occupy. I looked up at Grant. The room felt sharper, colder. "He is trading on my name," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "He told them he is a silent partner. He told them he controls me." Grant nodded grimly. "It gets worse, Lena. If he used this implied influence to secure his position with the Wren family, or if he used it to leverage financial terms in his prenuptial agreement or personal loans, that is actionable misrepresentation. He is selling access he does not have. If we acquire Redbridge today, and it comes out later that he claimed to facilitate it, the SEC could look at it as insider trading or market manipulation, even if it is all a lie. He is radioactive. I looked back at the email. My sister can be somewhat volatile. He had weaponized my silence. He had banked on the fact that I never defended myself, never bragged, never spoke up. He thought I was safe. He thought I was a resource he could mine forever without digging too deep. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was not anger. Anger is hot. This was ice. It was the absolute zero of emotional detachment. My brother was not just a bad sibling. He was a liability. He was a security risk to my corporation. Preserve everything. I ordered Grant, keeping my face perfectly still as the door to the hallway opened and the Redbridge team began to file back in. I want a full scrape of our external servers. Check for any other emails from his address. Check phone logs. If he has ever claimed to represent North Pine to a bank, a vendor, or a landlord, I want to know. Build a dossier. If he tries to claim credit for this deal, or if he tries to use this marriage to expose us to liability, I want enough evidence to bury him under a mountain of litigation so heavy he will never see the sun again. Grant tapped a note on his legal pad. Consider it done. But Lena, what about the deal? The deal proceeds, I said, closing the file folder and sliding it under my notebook. We do not stop a 9-figure acquisition because my brother is a con artist. We close the deal, we take the asset, and then I deal with the liability. As I finished speaking, the door opened one last time. Claudia walked in. She looked like she had aged 5 years in 15 minutes. Her skin was the color of parchment. Her eyes were red-rimmed. Though she had clearly tried to fix her makeup in the bathroom, she was no longer walking with the confident stride of a partner-track attorney. She walked like someone traversing a minefield. She took her seat across from me. She did not look at her tablet. She did not look at Mr. Sterling. She looked straight at me. And in her eyes, I saw the reflection of my own realization. She knew. She had gone out into the hallway, probably to call Ethan, or perhaps just to scream into the void. But somewhere in that panic, the math had started to work for her too. She was realizing that the man she was about to marry was a liar. If I was the CEO of North Pine, then everything Ethan had ever told her about my struggles was a lie. And if he lied about something as easily verifiable as his sister's job, what else was he lying about? She looked at me, and for the first time, there was no pity in her gaze. There was fear. Yes, but there was also a desperate, pleading questions. How much of it is fake? I held her gaze. I did not blink. I did not offer her comfort. I was not her friend, and I was not her sister-in-law. Not today. Today, I was the woman holding the scalpel, and I was about to show her exactly where the rot was hiding. Mr. Sterling clapped his hands together, oblivious to the silent conversation passing between us like a laser beam. Excellent, Sterling boomed. Shall we resume? We were discussing the intellectual property transfer. I kept my eyes on Claudia. Yes, I said softly. Let us discuss ownership. Let us discuss who actually owns what, and who is just pretending. Claudia flinched. She knew I wasn't talking about the software anymore. I tapped the screen to bring up the next slide. The investigation into my brother was now open. The verdict would be delivered later. But right now, in this room, I had a company to buy. And as I walked them through the integration strategy, dissecting their business model with ruthless efficiency, I saw Claudia watching me with a new understanding. She wasn't just watching a CEO. She was watching the only person in her life who was telling her the truth. The twist was not just that I was successful. The twist was that my success was the only real thing in a landscape built entirely of Ethan's fabrications. He had built a castle out of lies, and he had made the mistake of inviting the one person who knew how to use a wrecking ball. I turned to page 42 of the contract. Let us clarify the representations and warranties. I said, my voice cutting through the room. "It is vital that we verify all statements made by the selling party. We cannot have any undisclosed liabilities popping up later." Claudia lowered her head, staring at her hands. She understood. The message was received. The trap was no longer just for me. We were both in it now, and the only way out was through the truth. The meeting with Redbridge Logistics concluded at 12:30 in the afternoon. By 12:35, my phone had ceased to be a communication device and had transformed into a detonator. It started with a missed call from my mother, then a text from my father, then a string of frantic messages from Marla. Then the cycle repeated. The silence I had enjoyed for the last 5 years, the blessed indifference they had shown toward my existence, had evaporated the moment Claudia Wren walked out of my conference room and presumably made the most difficult phone call of her life to my brother. I sat in my office, watching the notifications stack up on the lock screen. "Mom, call us immediately. There has been a terrible misunderstanding." "Dad, Ethan says you are trying to ruin him. Pick up the phone." Marla, "Is it true? Are you actually the CEO? Why didn't you say anything?" I did not feel a surge of triumph. I did not feel the warm glow of vindication. I felt a profound sense of exhaustion. They were not calling to congratulate me. They were not calling to apologize for the years of neglect or the specific cruelty of the New Year's exclusion. They were calling because the tectonic plates of their social world had shifted, and they needed me to stabilize the ground beneath their feet. I swiped the notifications away and pressed the intercom button. "Sarah," I said. "Yes, Ms. Hartwell?" "If anyone named Hartwell or Vale calls the main line, send them to voicemail. I am not taking personal calls during business hours." There was a pause. "Actually, Ms. Hartwell, security just pinged me. Your parents are in the lobby. They are demanding to see you. They say it is a family emergency." I closed my eyes for a brief second, inhaling the cool, filtered air of my sanctuary. Of course they were here. They had likely driven straight into the city the moment Ethan called them, terrified that their golden boy's engagement, and the social capital that came with it, was disintegrating. "Let them up," I said, "but tell security to escort them. They do not get a wander pass. Bring them to the small conference room on the east side. I do not want them in my office." 10 minutes later, I walked into the East conference room. It was a glass-walled box, stark and modern, designed for quick, unsentimental meetings. My parents were standing by the window. When they turned to see me, their expressions were a study in cognitive dissonance. They were looking at me, their daughter, the one they sent $20 gift cards to because they thought she was destitute, but they were seeing the suit, the posture, and the terrifying reality of my authority. My mother, Marianne, looked around the room as if she had landed on an alien planet. Her eyes darted from the skyline view to the abstract art on the walls, and finally to the North Pine Systems logo etched into the glass door. She looked smaller here, in her living room. She was the matriarch, the queen of her suburban domain. Here, she was just a visitor without a badge. "Lena," she breathed. Her voice trembled. "This, all of this, is yours?" I did not offer them a seat. I stood at the head of the table, my hands clasped behind my back. "Hello, Mother. Hello, Father." My father, a man who had spent his life believing that loud voices equaled leadership, tried to summon his usual bluster. He took a step forward, his face flushed. "We need to talk about what happened with Claudia," he demanded, pointing a finger at me. "Ethan called us in a panic. He says she is refusing to speak to him. He says you ambushed her." I did not flinch at the finger. I simply looked at it until he felt foolish enough to lower it. "I did not ambush anyone," I replied calmly. "I conducted a business meeting. Claudia walked into my boardroom unprepared. That is not my fault." "You humiliated her," my father snapped, "and by extension, you humiliated your brother. Do you have any idea what you have done? The Wrens are crucial to Ethan's future. You cannot just spring this on people." I walked over to the sideboard and poured myself a glass of water, taking my time. "I find it interesting," I said, turning back to them, That your first reaction to finding out your daughter is the CEO of a multi-million-dollar corporation is to accuse her of sabotage. Not congratulations, not, we are proud of you, just fix it for Ethan. My mother stepped in, playing the peacemaker, a role she only adopted when the status quo was threatened. We are proud, Lena. Of course we are, she said, though the words sounded foreign in her mouth. But why did you lie to us? Why did you let us believe you were struggling? We have been worried sick about you for years, and you were doing this? It is cruel. Lena, it is manipulative. I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound that made them both jump. I never lied. Mother, not once. When you asked what I did, I told you I ran a tech company. You heard unemployed. When I told you I was working on logistics, you heard warehouse worker. You saw what you wanted to see because it made you feel better about yourselves. It is easier to have one successful child and one charity case, isn't it? It makes the hierarchy simple. That is not fair, my mother protested, clutching her handbag. We only wanted to help. You wanted to hide me. I corrected her. You told me not to come to the New Year's party 48 hours ago. You told me my presence was an embarrassment. You told me my condition, which is apparently just being successful without being loud about it, would scare off the wrens. My father waved his hand dismissively. That was different. We were trying to protect the family image. Ethan has worked hard to build a reputation. Ethan has worked hard to build a fraud, I said, my voice dropping an octave. My father froze. What did you say? I told them. I told them about the email Grant had found. I told them about Ethan using my name to get meetings. I told them how he had sold access to me, all while telling me I was worthless. Ethan has been leveraging my company to buy his way into society. I explained. He told the Wrens he had influence here. He told them he was an advisor. He lied to them, and he lied to you. The reason he didn't want me at that party wasn't because I was embarrassing. It was because if I showed up, his lies would have unraveled. My parents stood in silence. They were not shocked by the deceit. They were shocked that the deceit had failed. They were processing the information not as a moral failing of their son, but as a strategic error. Well, my father said finally, shifting his weight, that is complicated business. Ethan is ambitious. Sometimes you have to fake it until you make it. You know that. I stared at him. He was actually justifying it. That is not business. Dad, that is fraud. My mother stepped closer, reaching out as if to touch my arm, then pulling back when she saw the ice in my eyes. Lena, please, she pleaded. You have made your point. You have won. We see you now. You are successful. We get it. But please, do not destroy your brother's engagement over this. Call Claudia. Tell her you and Ethan are close. Tell her he does advise you sometimes. Just smooth it over, for the family. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the desperation in her eyes. It wasn't love. It was fear of losing face. She didn't care that Ethan was a liar. She cared that the neighbors might find out. I pulled my phone from my pocket. It had vibrated again. I glanced at the screen. It was a text from Marla. Hey, Lee. Mom says your office is insane. Look, I know we haven't talked much, but Gary's practice is looking for new investment partners. Since you're obviously loaded now, maybe you could bring him on as a consultant? Or I could come do PR for you? You need someone to handle your image, clearly. I showed the text to my mother. This is what family means to you people, isn't it? I asked. A transaction. Marla wants a job. You want a cover-up. Ethan wants a scapegoat. I put the phone away. No, I said. My father's face went purple. What do you mean? No. I mean, I am not calling Claudia. I mean, I am not lying to save Ethan. I mean, I am not hiring Marla. You are being selfish, my father shouted, his voice echoing off the glass. We are your family. You owe us. I walked to the door and opened it. 2 security guards were waiting just outside, their faces impassive. I owe you nothing. I said, I built this company while you were ashamed of me. I bought this building while you were telling people I was a failure. I am not your safety net. I am not your fix-it girl, and I am certainly not a tool you can pull out of the shed whenever you need to look impressive. I nodded to the guards. Please escort Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell to the ground floor. Their visitor passes have expired. My mother looked at me with horror. You are kicking us out? I am asking you to leave my place of business. I said, you can find your own way home. I have a company to run. My father sputtered, looking for a final word, a final command that would put me back in my box. You will regret this. Lena, you will end up all alone in this glass tower. I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had worn all day. I have been alone for a long time. Dad, the only difference is that now, the view is much better. I turned my back on them. I heard the guard step forward. I heard my mother start to cry. The weaponized tears she always used when she didn't get her way. But I didn't turn around. I walked back toward my office, my heels clicking on the floor. They left with a sense of deep, burning insult. But the truth was, I hadn't insulted them. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't called them names. I had simply treated them the way they had treated me for 30 years. I had made them a low priority. And judging by the silence that followed as the elevator doors closed behind them, that was the most painful revenge of all. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long, bruised shadows across the city skyline, but inside the North Pine System's boardroom, the lights were unforgivingly bright. The rest of the legal team from Hollis and Ward had departed, retreating to their high-rise offices to lick their wounds and redraft the contracts. My staff had cleared the water glasses and the papers. Only 2 people remained, myself, sitting at the head of the table, and Claudia Wren, sitting 3 seats away. She had asked for 10 minutes. I had granted her 5. She was no longer the poised attorney who had entered the room that morning. She looked stripped down, her armor of arrogance dismantled piece by piece. She had not come to beg for her job, and she had not come to apologize for her behavior at Thanksgiving. She was a lawyer, and she was here for discovery. She wanted to understand the sequence of events that had led her to humiliate herself in front of her senior partners. Why? She asked. Her voice was steady, but brittle. It sounded like glass about to shatter. I looked up from my tablet. Why what? Why did he tell me you were nothing? It was the right question. It went straight to the heart of the fraudulent architecture my brother had built. I did not offer her a tissue. I did not soften my expression. I unlocked my phone and opened the message thread from 2 nights ago. I slid the device across the black granite table. It spun slowly, coming to rest directly in front of her. Read the last 3 messages, I instructed. Claudia looked down. She read the timestamp. December 29th. She read the sender. Ethan. Do not show up on New Year's Eve. You will embarrass me. My sister has a condition. She is not stable. Claudia cannot know about you. I watched her eyes scan the text. I saw the physical recoil as the words hit her. She knew Ethan as the charming, attentive fiancé who bought her flowers and opened doors. She had never seen the Ethan who spoke to me. She was looking at the underbelly of his personality, the dark, utilitarian cruelty he reserved for people he considered beneath him. He told me you were unemployed, Claudia said, her voice barely a whisper. He told me you had a breakdown after your first startup failed. He said he was supporting you financially. He said he was the only thing keeping you off the streets. I took my phone back. I have not taken $1 from my parents or my brother since I was 22. I stated, my tone clinical, I bought my first apartment 3 years ago. I founded North Pine 5 years ago. Ethan knows this. He has always known this. Then why? She asked, looking at me with a desperation that was almost painful to watch. Why lie about something so easily disproven? Why risk it? Because he needed to be the sun, I said, and the sun cannot shine if there is a brighter light in the room. If I am the CEO, then Ethan is just the brother of a CEO. If I am successful, then his advice is worthless. He needed me to be small so he could feel tall. Claudia shook her head slowly. It is not just ego. Lena, it is deeper than that. She took a deep breath, and then she dropped the bomb. It was a piece of information that shifted the entire landscape of the betrayal. "My family," she began, staring at her hands, "the Wrens, we are protective. My father does not let just anyone marry into the trust. When Ethan and I started getting serious, my father ordered a background check. He wanted to know what Ethan brought to the table besides a consulting salary and a nice smile." I leaned forward. I had suspected something like this, but hearing it confirmed gave the situation a terrifying logic. "And what did Ethan tell him?" I asked. Claudia looked up, her eyes wet but fierce. "He told my father that the Hartwell family held the controlling interest in North Pine Systems. He told him that while you were the face of the company, he was the strategic architect. He claimed he was a silent partner with veto power over your board decisions." I felt a chill run down my spine. This was not just a lie to impress a girlfriend. This was a lie to secure a dynastic marriage. "He used me as a dowry," I said flatly. "Yes," Claudia admitted. "He knew my father respects tech equity. He knew that if he claimed to control North Pine, my father would approve the marriage. He sold you to us, Lena. He sold your brain, your work, your company. He acted like he owned you." The silence in the room was absolute. The exclusion from the New Year's party suddenly made perfect sense. It was a tactical necessity. If I had attended that party, if I had spoken to her father for 5 minutes, I would have inadvertently revealed that Ethan was not a silent partner, but a silent fraud. He had to quarantine me. He had to paint me as unstable so that if I ever did speak up, I would not be believed. "Did you talk to him?" I asked, "since the meeting started?" Claudia nodded. She looked sick. "I called him during the recess. I asked him if he was a partner at North Pine. I asked him if he had any equity." "And?" "He screamed at me," Claudia said, a look of disbelief crossing her face. "He did not deny it. He did not apologize. He screamed that you were trying to sabotage him. He said you must have planned this ambush to humiliate him because you are jealous of his happiness. He said it was your fault for not playing along." She let out a short, hollow laugh. "He blamed you, Lena. He is caught in a lie worth millions of dollars, a lie that invalidates our entire relationship, and his first instinct was to blame you for existing." I sat back in my chair. The diagnosis was complete. Ethan was not just a liar. He was a narcissist incapable of taking responsibility. He viewed other people not as human beings, but as props in his movie. I was the tragic backstory. Claudia was the trophy. Her father was the bank. "So," I asked, my voice devoid of sympathy, "what is your conclusion?" Claudia looked at the empty seat next to her. "He does not love me," she said quietly. "He loves the access I provide. He loves the fact that I am a Wren. If I were a receptionist, he would treat me exactly the way he treats you." It was a brutal realization, but a necessary one. She was seeing the matrix code behind the romance. I stood up. The meeting was over. I had given her the data, and she had processed it. My role as the revealer of truth was finished. "I am not going to tell you what to do. Claudia," I said, gathering my files, "I do not negotiate marriages. I do not resolve domestic disputes. This is between you and him." Claudia stood up as well. She looked unsteady, but her jaw was set. "I know," she said. "Thank you. I think—" "There is one more thing," I added, pausing by the door. She looked at me. "Ethan committed fraud to secure this relationship," I said, "but he also committed corporate fraud by representing himself as an agent of North Pine Systems to your father and your firm." Claudia stiffened. She was a lawyer again. She knew where this was going. "I cannot let that stand," I continued. "Regardless of what you decide to do with the wedding, North Pine will be taking steps to protect its brand. My legal team is drafting a formal cease and desist order. We are also preparing a statement for our investors clarifying that Ethan Vale has zero affiliation, equity, or advisory capacity within this organization." I looked her in the eye. "This will become public record. If he has signed any financial documents or prenuptial agreements based on his claimed assets in my company, Those documents will be invalid. He is going to be exposed. Claudia. Completely. I was giving her a warning. I was telling her to get out of the blast radius. Claudia nodded slowly. She picked up her briefcase. The tremor in her hands was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Do what you have to do. Lena, she said. She walked to the door, then stopped and looked back at me. He said you were an embarrassment, she said softly. He was wrong. You are the most terrifyingly competent person I have ever met. She opened the door and walked out. I watched her go. I did not feel sorry for her. Better she learned the truth in a boardroom on a Tuesday than in a divorce court 10 years from now. I walked back to my desk and pressed the intercom. Grant, I said. Yes, Lena? Prepare the file on Ethan. I ordered. I want the cease and desist sent by courier to his office tomorrow morning. And Grant? Yes? Flag his name in the security system. If he tries to enter the building, I want him stopped at the turnstiles. He is no longer family. He is a security threat. I released the button. The sun had fully set now. The city outside was a grid of glittering lights. I stood alone in my glass tower, surrounded by silence. My parents had left in anger. My brother was about to face ruin. My future sister-in-law was walking away from her wedding. Most people would call this a tragedy. Most people would say I had broken my family. But as I looked at the reflection of the boardroom table, clean and black and solid, I knew the truth. I had not broken anything. I had simply turned on the lights, and if the structure they built could not stand the glare of reality, then it deserved to collapse. I sat down and pulled the Red Bridge contract toward me. I had a company to integrate. The final signatures were scheduled for Friday, January 5th. The atmosphere in the boardroom was markedly different from the tension that had suffocated the room just 3 days prior. This time, the air was sterile, smelling of dry cleaning and laser-printed toner. The emotional volatility had been scrubbed away, replaced by the mechanical efficiency of a 9-figure transaction crossing the finish line. I sat at the head of the black granite table, watching the Redbridge executives sign the transfer of ownership documents. They looked resigned, but relieved. They were getting their payout. They were escaping a sinking ship. Across from me, Mr. Sterling, the senior partner from Hollis & Ward, reviewed the final indemnity clauses. There was an empty chair to his right. Ms. Wren has been removed from the transaction team, Sterling announced, his voice devoid of inflection. He did not look at me when he said it. Due to a personal conflict of interest that came to light regarding familial connections, we felt it was necessary to recuse her to preserve the objectivity of the deal. It was a standard corporate statement. It was boring, it was bureaucratic, and it was exactly the kind of quiet, procedural death I had envisioned for Claudia's involvement. There was no screaming match, no dramatic ejection by security, just a line item in a meeting minutes log stating that she was no longer relevant. I nodded once. Thank you for the update. Mr. Sterling, I said, let us proceed to the integration schedule. The signing continued for another hour. We were just wrapping up the final earn-out provisions when Grant Keller, my general counsel, tapped his finger on his laptop screen. He stopped the proceedings with a sharp clearing of his throat. Hold on, Grant said. His eyes were cold behind his wire-rimmed glasses. Before we notarize the final transfer of the executive communication channels, we have a compliance flag. He turned the laptop toward me. I looked at the screen. It was an email intercepted by our due diligence algorithm, which had been scraping the Redbridge servers for any last-minute liabilities. The email was dated 12 hours ago. It was sent from Ethan Vale to the outgoing CEO of Redbridge. Subject: Post-merger advisory role. Dear David, now that the acquisition is inevitable, we need to discuss the transition. As you know, my sister Lena can be difficult to manage. She has a tendency to over-engineer solutions. I am willing to come on board as a strategic consultant to bridge the gap between your legacy team and her new protocols. I can manage her expectations. I speak her language. For a retainer of $15,000 a month, I can ensure she does not gut your department entirely. I stared at the screen. Even as his world was collapsing, Even as his fiancée was questioning his entire existence, Ethan could not stop grifting. He was trying to sell protection from me to the very people I was buying. He was trying to monetize his own sister's alleged incompetence. I felt a final, severing snap in my chest. Any lingering thread of familial obligation, any microscopic desire to shield him from the full weight of his actions, dissolved instantly. Grant looked at me, waiting for the order. "Send it," I said softly. "Send what?" the Redbridge CEO asked, looking nervous. "A cease and desist order," Grant replied, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "We are formally notifying Mr. Ethan Vale that he has no authority to represent North Pine Systems, its CEO, or its interests. Any further attempt to solicit employment based on his relationship with Ms. Hartwell will be treated as corporate espionage and tortious interference." I signed the final page of the acquisition contract. "And Grant," I added, "make sure the courier delivers it to his office. I want his partners to see it." The meeting adjourned at 2:00. As I walked out of the boardroom and toward the elevators, I found a commotion in the lobby. Security had stopped a man at the turnstiles. It was Ethan. He looked nothing like the polished consultant who had sent me the text banning me from the New Year's party. His tie was loosened, his hair was disheveled, and his face was a mask of frantic, sweating desperation. My parents were standing a few feet behind him, looking pale and terrified. Ethan saw me approaching and lunged against the glass barrier. "Lena!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "You have to stop this. You sent a legal threat to my firm? Do you have any idea what you are doing? You are going to get me fired." I stopped 5 feet away from him, safe behind the layer of reinforced glass and armed security. "I am not getting you fired." "Ethan," I said, my voice calm enough to carry through the lobby, "you are getting yourself fired. You tried to sell access you do not have. You tried to solicit bribes from my acquisition targets. That is not family drama. That is racketeering." My mother stepped forward, clutching her purse with white knuckles. "Lena, please," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "He is your brother. You cannot destroy his career over a misunderstanding. We can fix this. Just call the lawyers off. We need to focus on the wedding. We need to save face." I looked at my mother. She was still doing it. She was still trying to sweep the debris under the rug, desperate to maintain the illusion of the perfect family. "There is no wedding to save." "Mother," I said. Before she could respond, the elevator doors behind me opened again. Claudia stepped out. She was carrying a cardboard box. It was the universal symbol of corporate departure. She had been at the Hollis and Ward offices downstairs, clearing out her desk after being removed from the deal team. She walked past me, stopping only when she reached the turnstiles where Ethan was standing. Ethan's face lit up with a flicker of hope. "Claudia, baby, listen to me," he pleaded, reaching his hand over the barrier. "Lena is crazy. She is vindictive. She is trying to ruin us. Tell her we are a team." Claudia looked at his hand. She did not take it. She looked at my parents, who were watching her with bated breath, praying she would be the glue that held their fractured image together. Then she looked at Ethan. I read the email. "Ethan," Claudia said. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear. "The one you sent to Redbridge. You tried to sell me out to my own client. You told them you could control your crazy sister." Ethan stammered. I was just trying to secure our future. It was business." "It was a lie," Claudia corrected him. She set the box down on the floor. She reached into her purse and pulled out the engagement ring. It was a large, gaudy diamond, the kind bought to impress other people, not to symbolize love. My parents gasped. "Claudia, no," my father shouted. "Think about what you are doing. Think about the reputation." "I am thinking about it," Claudia said. She placed the ring on the metal ledge of the turnstile. It made a sharp, metallic click. "You told me for months that Lena was the embarrassment of this family," Claudia said, looking Ethan dead in the eye. "You told me she was the shame you had to hide." She gestured toward me, standing in the lobby of the building I owned, flanked by the legal team I commanded. Look at her. Ethan, she is not the embarrassment. Claudia's gaze drifted to my parents, then back to my brother. You are, she finished. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Ethan stared at the ring. The color drained from his face. He had lost his leverage. He had lost his status. He had lost the audience he performed for. Claudia turned to me. She did not smile, but she nodded. It was a gesture of respect, one soldier to another. Good luck with the acquisition. Lena, she said. She picked up her box and walked out the revolving doors, stepping into the cold January wind without looking back. My family stood on the other side of the security barrier. They looked small. They looked ordinary. For the first time in their lives, they were forced to look at me not through the lens of their own disappointment, but through the lens of reality. They realized that the narrative they had clung to, the story where I was the failure and Ethan was the star, was the only thing holding their self-esteem together, and I had just burned the script. I did not wait for them to speak. I did not wait for my father to bluster or my mother to beg. I turned around. Let us go, I said to Grant. We walked back toward the elevators. As the doors slid shut, I caught one last glimpse of them. Ethan was slumped against the wall. My parents were arguing with each other. They were trapped in the lobby, trapped in their own mediocrity, while I was ascending. I returned to the boardroom. The room was empty now. The lawyers were gone. The executives were gone. It was just me and the view of the city I had conquered. I walked to the head of the table and sat down. I picked up the final document of the day, the post-merger integration plan. I uncapped my pen. They had spent 30 years trying to keep me out of the room. They had tried to tell me I did not belong at the table. They had tried to define me by what I lacked. I signed my name on the bottom line, Lena Hartwell, CEO. I laid the pen down. Let them call me an embarrassment. Let them tell their stories at their country clubs and their dinner parties. Let them whisper whatever makes them sleep at night. Because every time they looked up at the skyline, every time they read the business news, every time they cashed a check or shipped a package, they would have to remember one thing. I was the one sitting in the chair, and they were the ones waiting in the lobby. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear your thoughts on how Lena handled her family. Did she go too far? Or was it exactly what they deserved? Please leave a comment down below letting me know where you are tuning in from. I always enjoy seeing our global community in the chat. If you enjoyed this revenge drama, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Lila Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story get recommended to more people who need a little justice in their day.